got our preliminary maps in 2018, so that was sort of the first view that we got of these maps. Every time FEMA has storms to attend to and things like that, they get backed up, so it took quite a while. So in 2018, we received the maps, we reviewed them. We hired a consultant, we did an interlocal with all of you to review these maps. Now, there's two ways you can review a FEMA map. You can spend millions of dollars and redo the entire study, or you can do kind of a checks and balances type review, where you look at, okay, what data did they put in, did they follow the correct methodology, etc. That's what we did. There were a few areas that did end up getting updated, none in the city of Clearwater, but in 3 of the other jurisdictions. And then we got our final maps just recently. We got our letter of final determination. It was dated at the end of February. We all received it early March. So 6 months later is when they became effective. Most of us have an auto-adopt in our floodplain ordinances, so those maps were automatically adopted. So we have these maps in place now. And I'll show you the difference coming up here. So the flood insurance rate map, just kind of a background on it. They're used for 3 main things: flood insurance requirements, flood insurance rates, and regulations. And the flood insurance requirements are going to be changing as of October 1st. And I spoke with one of our insurance advocates last week, and she said actually they're going to start rating the renewal policies starting September 1st on the new program, which goes into place October 1st. And what that new program does is it takes the original way that they've been doing this since the late 60s of looking at rating tables and what flood zone you're in, what your base flood elevation is compared to your first floor elevation, and using these old tables, it's kind of moving it forward into the current methodology that the private industry has been using for quite some time. So they're looking at different types of storms. They're not just going to look at that 100-year storm anymore. So they're going to look at different storms. They're going to look at that first floor elevation. They're going to look at the most recent data. It's no longer based on the flood zone or the base flood elevation. They're also going to be looking at foundation type, whether you're on piles or piers or a slab foundation.
Which is better?
Piers.
Well, if you want you can engineer things, but if you want your structure to survive storm surge, piles and piers obviously are the preferable way to go. But I would talk to your building official about that. I'm not a building official. Okay, so we've got the blue area on these flood insurance rate maps are the high-risk areas. The orange shaded areas are the moderate risk areas, and then the unshaded are low risk. Obviously, that doesn't mean low risk. These FEMA maps, it is a regional study. They're not going to take into account that urban rainfall that you see in these isolated spots that you all know about based on your jurisdiction. The 500-year floodplain is that orange area, and the 100-year floodplain is that blue area. We're getting a new feature on this map called a LMWA, and that is a limit of moderate wave action. So prior to this new map, the velocity zone, the V zone, we anticipated waves of greater than 3 feet with that 100-year modeled storm event. And then there was no wave action modeled after that. So now they've placed a LMWA, which is the limit of where the wave action, moderate wave action is. So between that LMWA and out to that V zone is 1.5 to 3 feet of wave action with that particular 100-year storm that FEMA modeled. So this is the side view of it. So you can see from the water side, you're going to have obviously larger waves coming in. And then once you hit that A zone, those waves will decrease in elevation until you get to that LMWA, then they'll continue to decrease. And FEMA recommends just regulating this as a V zone because there is wave action there. So countywide, this is what we saw with the FEMA map. And what we did was we took a look at, all right, what the effective map, the map that just expired, what does that look like compared to the new map? What does that map look like compared to the vulnerability study? We use that kind of as a baseline. So when we compare that baseline, the recently expired FEMA map, to this new map that went into effect last week, we see that more than half the county where we have a change is decreasing. And on the barrier islands, it's decreasing significantly. And on the bay side, it had never been modeled before, so it wasn't as surprising to see increases on the bay side because we're seeing that back bay effect. It had never had a coastal model done on the bay side, so it was just that kind of riverine study and estimates of the coastal. So this is by jurisdiction. The red area is the area that we are seeing a decrease in base flood elevation. The blue is where we would see an increase in base flood elevation. And you can see that it varies by jurisdiction. Obviously, those barrier island communities are seeing complete decreases along the Gulf side. And areas like St. Petersburg, it's kind of like a half and half because they've got areas around, county also, and you as well. So you've got a little bit of a mix. So Oldsmar and Safety Harbor are the only two that we're really just seeing increases, and that's because they're entirely on the bay side. So these are the actual base flood elevation differences. And you can see here that we've got, you know, a -1, -2 decrease in a lot of areas. And those areas are shown in the red and orange and yellow on the west side of the county. So those are all the decreases. So we're going from, you know, some certain elevation on the map that just expired to a lower elevation. So building regulations would reflect that if we don't fill this gap. So this is just a zoomed in. So the vulnerability assessment is that new county study that was just completed last year that was based on 2018 data. And we can see here that we've got about a 1 foot increase in base flood elevation over the recently expired FEMA maps on this study. So it's a different look, likely because of the probability modeling that went into the studies. And this is a comparison of the two studies. So we see the FEMA study on the top and the county study on the bottom line, and data through 2012, like I said, with the FEMA study, through 2018 with the county study. Two different models were used. They're both coupled wave models, and they're both very good models, just two different modeling methodologies. The LiDAR that was used to map out the floodplains was 2007 for the FEMA study, because remember they collected all the data up through 2012, and that's what we had at that time. And then 2017 LiDAR data for the county study. These are all the storms that occurred between 2012 and 18, so these are not included in that probability model that FEMA did. The vulnerability assessment, this is just sort of a reality check. We can see blue sky flooding on the street there, and then we can see it reflected in the storm surge inundation, the tidal inundation map. So the vulnerability assessment was twofold. One part of it was to look at sea level rise scenarios, so just tidal flooding into the future for many different time horizons, 2040, 2070, 2100, for different tides, like a king tide versus a regular high tide. And then the storm surge was based on that, but they started with this baseline storm surge model for current conditions, which is what we're comparing here, just current conditions. And then they applied some of those sea level rise scenarios to that for some dynamic modeling of future storm surge models. And we all remember Tropical Storm Eta in our recent past. You all weren't impacted by it as much as South County. But you can see all these red dots on the map on the right. Those are all the flood insurance claims from Tropical Storm Eta. And we can see with the vulnerability assessment, a king tide in 50 years from now, those areas that are highlighted on the map, those really are the areas that were inundated by the flooding from Tropical Storm Eta. So this vulnerability assessment can be used for more than just, you know, regulatory or capital planning. We can actually see where those low-lying areas are for some outreach. So we kind of put three things together. If you do nothing, over here on your beaches, you'll be seeing people building lower. If you try to hold the line, remember I said the vulnerability study is about a foot higher than your map that just expired. So to hold the line, you would want to go with the higher of the two BFEs, and then apply a freeboard to the new FEMA map. Or you can integrate that new data, and you can go to a higher standard. Go with the higher of the BFEs, keep your current freeboard, just apply it to whichever. And if you wanted to go even further, you could look at those future conditions, a 2070 storm surge, and model to that. Or you can regulate to a bigger storm event, a 500-year storm, like a larger hurricane. When we looked at this, the new FEMA map prepares you maybe for a Cat 1 if you compare it to those slosh models, and the vulnerability assessment is closer to a Cat 2 if you're looking just at hurricane categories. A 500-year storm, of course, would be a larger category storm. It would be a Cat 3 or 4 if you wanted to prepare for that. So it's how do you build versus probability versus what does a Cat 1, 2, or 3 look like. So just some things to think about. And then the coastal A zone, of course, FEMA recommends doing those B zone regs in that coastal A zone because there is wave action there. And keep in mind, anywhere on a barrier island, it's subject to storm surge. You've seen the storm surge inundation map. So you've got flowing, moving water. across. That doesn't mean there's not flowing, moving water when the coastal A zone stops. You've got the wave action with that particular 100-year storm that FEMA modeled up to the coastal A zone. So FEMA recommends doing V-zone regs in those coastal A zones. A couple different options. There would be a modified version of that. Just do the V-zone regs for residential properties rather than commercial. Give the commercial an opportunity to build, do their flood proofing and build on a backfilled stem wall. It still needs to be engineered, of course. I doubt many will do that. The average depth in the coastal A zones was 4 feet, and then you put freeboard on top of that. It's a waste of space, really. I mean, people are going to want to have parking below. So the other option would be to do just V-zone regs on all the barrier islands, understanding that they're subject to storm surge, moving water. And just back to the changes, and you all are, so you've only got, what, 15% it looks like changing overall citywide, about 2/3 of that decreasing. Where you have increases, the vulnerability assessment wouldn't impact those properties. You'd have to go with the FEMA. You can't go lower than FEMA's as the baseline. So you would be protecting, it looks like your barrier islands on the map there is what you're looking at. And that's land mass. So even if there was some area that's decreasing on your mainland, you probably don't have structures that close to the water down there. So this is just a newer slide from FEMA on the new pricing methodology. So they're looking at the flooding source, how close you are to the water, what the foundation type is, what the lowest floor height is, when they're calculating what that flood insurance rate is going to be. And of course, there's a concern about the flood insurance rates. If you build too low, the flood insurance rate will be higher using this new system, which could impact the property values. And we did reach out to several stakeholder groups, and as of June, the end of June, this was the feedback we were getting. The majority of our stakeholders were saying we should probably just use the vulnerability assessment because it's newer data, it's robust data, and it won't negatively impact what's going to happen with the whole insurance rating. And we all know insurance rates are not going to come down in Florida. Oh, and the Pinellas Realtor Organization did support this as well. They sent a letter of support. This is just the timeline. So it's been a long process. 2012, 2018 preliminary maps. 2019, we reviewed it. 2020, we got the vulnerability assessment data. The appeal period ended, so the timing of that wasn't really in our favor, but it was what it was. So now we have this other study, and we have an opportunity to adopt it. So with that, take any questions you might have.
Any questions? Councilmember Albritton.
I think Clearwater, didn't they adopt a 1-foot freeboard over the FEMA? Did we do that?
2 feet, actually.
2?
Uh-huh. Yep, so I just want to show you some, if
The FEMA minimum is 1 foot, and you all have 1 extra foot on top of that.
Okay, that's what it was, yeah.
Yeah,
1 extra
you have,
foot.
right.
Yeah. So this is a comparison between our previous firm and the one that was adopted last week. So you can see that there's a lot of red, a lot of orange on there. There's even a little bit of purple, which coincides with a 6-foot drop in our BFE. So we have adopted the 2 foot of freeboard, so that is not going to compensate for that reduction at all. So that is what's happening out on the beach. You can see on Tampa Bay, we are increasing a foot, 2 in places, and so our protection on Tampa Bay is increasing with the new firm, with the adopted firm. And so this is what the comparison is with the vulnerability assessment, adopting that new BFE with the vulnerability assessment compared to the new adopted map. So this light blue and green color, like it's a difference of 1 or 2 feet. Like, let me just move this up here. So you can see like the elevation difference is slightly higher, 1 or 2 feet with the vulnerability assessment. And so it's protecting our barrier islands more, it's providing resilience, all of that kind of stuff. So, I am requesting on behalf of the engineering department and the planning and development department that we have your consensus and support moving forward with regulating with the vulnerability assessment. And then the next step is incorporating the vulnerability assessment into our floodplain management ordinance. And that ordinance will come back to you in October. So I would like some direction and provide you some, and I can answer any questions then as well.
Any questions for Ms. Kessler? How often is this study done?
The FEMA study, the last one was, the index was dated 2009, but really the majority was 2003. And FEMA has a new program, I can't remember the name of it, but last year or the year before, they said, you know, we're going to start looking at this mapping thing differently. We're not just going to look at this 100-year storm, because, you know, we're seeing these storms come in more frequent, and that 100-year storm might not be the true reflection of what the actual risk is. They're going to be rating insurance policies on this new methodology of looking at different storm frequencies and things as well. So their new mapping procedure may change by the time it comes back to us to get remapped. Chances are, you know, they don't use sea level rise or future conditions when they map. FEMA doesn't. But by the time they come back and remap us, you know, conditions may have changed by then. So those initial conditions, those antecedent conditions that go in, will likely be higher, so the surge will likely be higher. So the maps may bounce back to looking more like what they were or higher.
Well, there's always apprehension, I think, from our residents who lived in these coastal areas, especially out on Sand Key and Clearwater Beach and Highland Estates. And, you know, with it comes new rates and what will happen with our entire real estate, you know, out in those areas. So probably won't see a change for another decade.
So the insurance rating is no longer going to be based on the map in October. So those insurance rates, if somebody does not have a policy now and then they come into the new program, that rate is going to be the actual rate based on all those parameters that I pointed out. The current methodology, if somebody goes in and gets their policy now, will be rated on the old method. What flood zone are you in? What's your first floor elevation? Your elevation certificate information, etc. So if they go and they lock that in now, they'll be put on what FEMA calls a glide path, where it can't increase more than, I believe, 18% per year if it's your primary residence. So they'll be locked into that glide path if they get their policies in place now. But if they don't have a policy or they're building a new house, and this is really the concern, right? Somebody comes in and the new FEMA map says you can build 4 feet lower. They come in and build 4 feet lower, but what does that risk rating 2.0 look like for a price on that insurance policy? You're going to have $12,000 a year insurance policy, and what's that do to the property value? But if we kind of fill that gap, like Sarah said, and just make them build to what our study shows the base flood elevation appears to be, then that risk rating 2.0 policy should be lower too, because you're higher.
And what if somebody even wants to come in and build above that? Does our height restrictions then come into play, Gina? Is that going to be the limiting factor?
So for height restrictions for the county, we go from whatever the design flood elevation is to the midline of the roof.
Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. We measure from base flood elevation plus the 2 feet of freeboard, so the design elevation.
So has there ever been talk of raising that for this purpose, or we're comfortable that everyone can meet the higher standard?
Well, if you're changing where you're measuring height from, it should take care of itself.
Okay. All right.
Just another comment about the risk rating 2.0. They're hoping to make it a more equitable process as well. So residents along Stevenson Creek are also impacted by these map changes. And so looking at where your source of flooding is also a factor as well. So, you know, the homes out on Clearwater Beach and the homes along Stevenson Creek have 2 different types of flooding, and they're 2 different types of structures. And so this risk rating 2.0 is going to take into the equity of some of those flood policies as well.
Other questions? So our action really is just to support these changes on Thursday. There's no
This is actually a work session only item.
It is?
Yeah, so we're just looking for
So
some
we're just looking
direction,
for consensus that
Yep,
we
and then we'll-
support the
and
recommendations.
then we'll design the ordinance, yes.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically no need for us to make any changes since we've got the extra foot already above. We don't really need to make any, they're not asking us to really make any changes, are they?
So, it's just regulating with the vulnerability assessment in places that the BFE is higher in the vulnerability assessment than with the firm. That's what we're asking the consensus to.
It's not a problem.
I think we
I
have
see
to
it as
do
a
it.
problem.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, I need to just set a time to meet with you to understand this a little bit more. It's a whole lot coming at us.
It's a lot.
And I want to have a better handle on it, but, yeah, it seems like the notes I took from your presentation, was, you know, we're going to do, our choices do nothing, hold the line, or integrate new data with this higher BFE, right? And so your recommendation is to integrate the new data.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, ladies. 2.2,
Approve a professional services agreement in work order to Envision Advisors LLC of Tampa, Florida, per request for qualifications 51-21 for owner's representative services during construction of Imagine Clearwater in the not-to-exceed amount of $240,000 and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Ms. Kivett.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Tara Kivett, Engineering Director. In response to Council's request to procure an owner's rep services for the Imagine Clearwater project, an RFQ was advertised soliciting those services. Staff selected Envision Advisors due to their experience and collaborative approach to act as our facilitator and professionally manage our project team to complete a successful project. Envision will be our advocate, managing scope, budget, and schedule, as well as help maintain quality, ID, critical milestones and progress, and address contingencies. This professional services agreement and $240,000 work order covers 24 months of services through completion of the project and closeout in summer of 2023. Pete Karamitasanis will be our lead project manager, and Jonathan Moore as client advocate and assistant project manager are both here to answer any questions.
questions? Councilmember Albrecht?
So we're gonna pay $240,000 in the hopes that we could save that amount or more with any kind of overruns that may come up that I also had concerns on, you know, with the way the contract was.
To be honest, that's really not their main goal. Obviously, to complete the project in or under budget and on time and at a high quality and just making sure things run smoothly. You know, so they're really an extension of our project management team. So I can't comment on if they'll save $240,000. I don't know those answers. I am very optimistic. Obviously, with their help, we'll have an extra set of project management team to make sure that the project does not go over budget.
Gentlemen, can you come up, because I have some questions. This was something that I proposed, and I think it's important. Can you talk a little bit about projects that you've done in the past that are of similar magnitude?
Similar.
You can take your mask off so people can hear you better.
Yes, thank you. My name is Pete Karamitsanis. Good morning. Projects we've managed of similar scope are the Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park in Tampa and the Tampa Museum of Art and Kylie Gardens. We just finished about a year ago the St. Petersburg Pier project.
So you oversaw the pier
Yes.
with Skanska?
Yes, from the beginning of the first design competition through the cancellation of the contract, through the new competition, all the way to the end.
So how do you think you add value in this process?
The difference between owner's representation and project management is that you really deal with the whole team attitude and how people come together to get a project done successfully. And the way we added value to this is that we became an advisor to the mayor and to the mayors, actually, through the cities that we worked with, and to the engineering staff in terms of how to get the project, how to align the people attitudes, how to keep track of the project budget, make people accountable for maintaining schedule and budget, making sure that we minimize change orders.
Talk about change orders. I understand there were a lot on the pier.
No, actually, the change orders on the pier were all elective change orders. They were not non-elective change orders. The pier started, if you remember, as one project, the project over the water. Then the project over the land was added, and then the pier ended up being 14 projects altogether. So tenant improvements were added, the individual buildings were added, the Eckelman sculpture, the net sculpture was added. So there were enough. So the change orders were additive, elective change orders, not non-elective change orders.
So they were by the owner.
Yes, yes, and adding pieces to the project. Yes.
And so I was down at the pier. It's beautiful. I noticed a lot of cracking concrete. Is that something that's getting rectified over
Yes.
time? And how close are you to Skanska? How do you keep independence so that you're working for us if you've worked with Skanska in the past?
Let me start with the first project with Skanska was the Tampa Museum of Art. And that project was, the schematic design was over budget, and we maintained the budget of the city. We worked with everybody to bring it back to budget and maintain it all the way to the end. Our next project with Skanska was the Florida Polytechnic University on I-4. That project had, just like the Museum of Art did, had another internationally known architect. At schematic design, that project was $24 million over budget. We brought it back into budget and maintained the budget all the way to the end. And then the pier, actually the water portion was completed for the money that was left over between the initial budget and the after the project was canceled, and the budget that it completed for. So we have a track record of keeping not only the construction team, the construction manager team accountable, but also the design teams accountable to get the project done.
We don't have the benefit of having you for value engineering. We're bringing you in a little bit late. Tell me, from looking at the plans and the scope of work and our budget, are you optimistic? Are there any things that you are concerned about now, looking at all of the plans and the construction time frame, that you would be thinking about currently?
We just started looking at these, so I'm not prepared to make a full assessment of this. But the underground work concerns us a little bit, only because it's unknown. The protection of the band shell from the things you just heard in terms of the elevations, we need to look into that more. The construction of the wall that actually protects the building is still under engineering review. But altogether, we think that the time frame is reasonable, and then at a subsequent meeting, I'll be able to tell you an opinion on the cost. But we think at this point, what you have done has been very measured and very professionally done, so we believe that we can manage that to your expectations.
What were lessons learned from the pier?
The backstories are the lessons learned of the pier. How the thing survived all the way to the end is a miracle.
Because of all the changes?
Because of all the underlying politics behind it.
We don't have as much of that up here.
I don't think you do. And it's not just politics in the sense of the city government, it's just the community and all the underlying issues behind that actually canceled the first project. Admittedly, having been in it from its inception, I can tell you that the result of this project is better than what originally was intended as a concept for that pier. And so it gave the city an incredible park for the community, which the first project wasn't doing that.
Other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I had just, I had a question that's more, on our legislative text, on the narrative, we're calling this, Imagine Clearwater Park. Is that what we're gonna be calling it? It's referred to as Imagine Clearwater and not Coachman Park, or it's just there as, that's what it's, is that what we're referring to? It,
Be referred to as the Imagine Clearwater Project.
Project.
Project, not the park.
Okay.
Imagine Clearwater Project.
Okay, I thought it said Imagine Clearwater Park, but, okay. So I wanted to note that it was great to see that 3 out of the 10 respondents for this were women or minority or small business enterprise firms. I had a question about why we chose Envision, and one of the questions I had was, what did you work on? So that's all good. So the purpose is broadly stated in the contract as to provide coordination and synergy necessary for successful project completion. And then we have your scope and sequence of services, which are really extensive. So, and you went through a bunch of coordination with engineering and communication here and all that. So you've outlined 7 headings and over 30 subheadings of your responsibilities. And then you get down to, you know, part of the expectation of what this will require. And I was struck by 10 to 20 hours a week. I mean, that seems like mighty small amount of time for doing, you know, 7 headings and 30 subheadings of responsibilities, and at $10,000 a month, that payment would be $125 to $250 an hour. So, you know, to me, it seems like, really, you're going to be able to do all that? Are you going to have a person on site? I mean, what's that going to look like?
Actually, there are weeks where we work 60 hours a week, and there are weeks where we work 10 hours a week. It all depends on what is required on the project. So our fee is not based on a limited number of hours. Our fee is based on having the ability to do whatever we need to do. And the reason we ask for a set fee every month is that then we're able to do what we need to do without having to get authorization to spend another half an hour or 3/4 of an hour or 5 hours to do the work. So our work doesn't stop at 5, it doesn't start at 8. We do whatever we need to do.
Okay, and then,
And Councilmember Beckman, I'd like to add that I did a cost comparison to what our typical professional services cost. And when I looked at the range of 12 to 20 hours and what that came out to per month for $10,000, it was in line, even on the low side if they work 20 hours a week, to what we pay our typical EORs, AORs, and that type of services.
Okay.
So I double checked that.
thanks. It just seemed like there's a whole lot of work there. I mean, I couldn't do it in 10 or 20 hours a week, but that's not my expertise. Well, and part of the documents, the work order and all that stuff, I just want to make sure that, so when you get paid the $10,000 a month, it looks like you give a brief narrative of what you've done in that month. Will that be presented to us? Is it going to be public record and we get to see what the status is every month?
Yes, well, everything we get is public record, of course. So, but if you guys would like, we can definitely share those updates with you. And, you know, we'll also be getting a lot of feedback from Skanska, you know, photography and things like that, so we can share that also.
I want to be careful, though. I don't mind getting reports, but, you know, probably the most qualified person up here is Councilmember Albritton, but we're not gonna be micromanaging this project.
No, thank
That's
you.
why we're gonna be hiring these gentlemen, so
Our reports
that's outside of our lane.
Our reports will be brief and at a high level, so anyone can understand.
That'd be good.
Other questions, comments? Consent?
Yes.
Do us well, gentlemen, you have the job.
We will, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
2.3,
Approve a purchase order to Arthur J. Gallagher Risk Management Services, Inc. of Orlando, Florida for builder's risk insurance for Imagine Clearwater in the amount of $276,182 pursuant to City Code of Ordinances, Section 2.5631I, insurance, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Mayor, and Council. Tim Kurtz, Construction Manager for the Engineering Department. The item before you is to purchase a builder's risk insurance to protect the buildings, materials, supplies through the completion of the project. It's pretty standard for all building construction on city projects. The cost of this insurance policy is high due to the size and value of the buildings being constructed, the location, proximity to the water, as well as the duration of the project. With me this morning, I have Rick Osorio, the risk manager, and Danny Christie with Arthur G. Gallagher, and they will be glad to answer any questions you may have specific to the policies.
any questions? Councilmember Albritton.
Generally, contractor gets the builder's risk insurance. Do they have, what do they have in their contract that's,
Well, they're basically covering the project to the point of their construction, but the risk they were excluding. They are self-insured as far as their subs and guaranteeing the work gets done. But for the vertical construction, it's pretty standard for the city to policy, to cover the building and the materials of the building through construction. So that's what this is. And it's because we have the band shell and canopy, basically the dock master's building and restroom facility, as well as the event restroom. And it's all the materials and just the proximity. And of course, we've added the Clomar wall, which also gives us extra sustainability and gets us up even further out of the floodplain that was designed. So, it's mainly the protection in the event of named storms and that kind of thing. It just gives us that extra bridge of coverage.
Other questions, Councilmember Beckman?
Does this kick in once the buildings are like a quarter complete, or does it start now when they're not even?
It'll start as soon as they start getting materials and start building foundations, and it'll cover the materials, the cost of construction, all the way up through the completion of the job, so.
Well, wouldn't you think the builder's insurance would cover, so if we have a load of bricks and, concrete stuff, rebar and all that stuff delivered, then you're saying we have to buy insurance just to cover it sitting there as we start to construct it?
Well, I don't think it's gonna be sitting there, we don't have room. In other words, the way it's being built, it's coming in as they're applying. There will be some things on site, but they're covering the earthwork, all the dirt they're storing, the equipment that they have their building with. So that's pretty much what they're covering.
Vice Mayor?
Well, the summary in the agenda item, it says that, this is something that normally the contractor is responsible for, and it would be then, therefore, then in the bid and the cost of the project. But the city has the opportunity and usually is able to get this at a cheaper rate than the contractor themselves, seeing as this is a city project. So that's why we're covering it, and it's not in the contractor's contract, correct?
Correct. And Arthur J. Gallagher facilitated the policies, and we're able to go to two separate companies and bring it in lower than any one single company would give the same coverage. So it was shopped, and Rick Osorio handled that for us and did a great job.
So when you look at this, I'm just curious, is there any calculus done on whether to self-insure versus getting the insurance?
I would have to defer to Rick on that.
We self-insure in many instances.
We are self-insured to a degree, but this is a big project. It would be catastrophic, I feel, if we had a major storm 3/4 through the construction.
But the vertical construction accounts for what, 25%?
I would imagine.
30%
I
of
don't
the
have that
entire
calculation,
project?
but
You can take
getting back to your question, Mayor, there's always the option to self-insure anything. But this project is so big, there's so much public interest in it. It's very complex. It has multiple components. So in order to self-insure this project would be a high risk for us, especially since it's going to be built through the storm season. So we felt that it was the best use of city money and city self-insurance option to go ahead and buy this policy. Like Tim mentioned, it's very cheap, and I don't mean to say cheap as like we're not covered for
We're
everything.
throwing around $250,000 around this
We're
city
not buying
lately.
Volkswagen coverage here,
Okay.
we're buying Cadillacs. We have two very good insurance companies covering this project. But we thought, and we discussed it with Arthur J. Gallagher, that we thought it was the best way to go ahead and buy this policy. And save the self-insurance monies that we have in the insurance fund. If a hurricane hits us, we'll need those monies. But at least this is covered through insurance, so.
Any other questions? Consent?
Yes.
3.1.
Approve the contract for purchase by the City of Clearwater of certain real property located on the southwest corner of North Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue and Hingman Street with the purchase price of $35,000 and total expenditures not to exceed $37,000. Authorize the appropriate officials to execute same together with all other instruments required to effect closing, and approve the transfer of $37,000 from general fund reserves at third quarter to cover the cost of the purchase. Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Chuck Lane, Economic Development and Housing Department. You're all aware that the city recently purchased the former Elks Lodge in the North Greenwood neighborhood. We purchased it as a strategic development opportunity in the middle of the North Greenwood commercial corridor. That property is addressed at 1011 Engman Street, and while it appears to sit on the southwest corner of Engman and North MLK Ave, it does not. Prior to council approving the Elks Lodge acquisition, I had one-on-ones with each of you and explained that the small lot on the corner was owned by a third party, and I was working with the owner to purchase it. This contract gets that lot under contract. It's at a price slightly above appraised value, but staff believes this will provide for a much more desirable development opportunity now that the assemblage includes the North MLK frontage. If approved by council on Thursday, staff will work towards closing relatively quickly. Questions, please.
Any questions? Councilmember Beckman and then the Vice Mayor.
I just wanted to say it was really nice to see that this purchase went forward for a fair amount. And I wanted to say, thank you to the owner, W.A. Lewis, Inc., because I think they could have, made things difficult. Seems like it's a really good thing. I'm happy that happened.
Vice Mayor?
Chuck, refresh my memory, the Elks Club itself, the building structurally has some issues, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, there are quite a bit of issues there.
Are we looking at leveling it and
Yes,
just,
we're planning to demolish.
and then putting this whole parcel out to RFP?
I think we'll probably wait until the CRA is in place in North Greenwood.
Mm-hmm.
There's more options on how we surplus that, but I envision that entire lot, yes, to be a redevelopment opportunity.
All right, thank you.
Good one.
I just want to thank you for staying on top of this. We pretty much knew we needed to get this remainder property.
Yep.
And I'm glad that we're getting it done. Consent?
Yes.
Yeah.
3.2.
Appoint 11 members to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee to include the appointment of a locally elected official and adopt Resolution 21-30. Mr. Lane.
As a recipient of State Housing Initiative Partnership Program funding, we're required by Florida statute to assemble an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee now every year. This committee is tasked with reviewing land use policies such as ordinances, regulations, zoning, and development standards, and other things that we have in place that might affect the cost of residential development. The committee's objective is to identify potential barriers and incentives that might impact a developer's decision to build affordable housing. We use the committee's input annually to update our local housing incentive strategy. Staff will ask council to accept that updated strategy in December at the conclusion of the committee's work. The committee is comprised of 11 members. 7 of the seats are filled by members of our current Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board. 3 of the seats are filled by people meeting specific criteria required by the statute. Of those 3 members, 1 represents a local planning agency, one is an essential service representative, and one is a residential home builder. The remaining seat must be filled by a member of council. Councilmember Beckman served this role last year, but City Council is required to make that appointment every year. So I'll take questions, please.
Any questions? We'll have to pass this resolution on Thursday. Do you care to
Continue to.
participate again?
I would love to continue to participate.
Okay, we'll discuss that on Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Thank you.
4.1.
Approve the collective bargaining agreement as negotiated between the City of Clearwater and Fraternal Order of Police Clearwater Officers Bargaining Unit, Lodge 10 for fiscal years 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023, 2023, 2024, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same as Pier.
Good morning, Jennifer Poyer, Human Resources Director. The current collective bargaining agreement between the City of Clearwater and the FOP officers expires on September 30th of this year. I am very proud to announce that we have reached a tentative agreement that has been ratified by the union. The agreement is a 3-year agreement providing for a 3% general wage increase for all classifications for all 3 years. It also provides for a step pay increase of either 5% or 2.5%, depending on the years of service, and provides for all pay ranges to be adjusted by 3% in each of the 3 years as well. Additionally, in this contract, we have made some additional changes, such as we have increased the standby pay to $50 per weekday and $100 per weekend. The Community Policing Squad, Traffic Section, and School Resource Officers will now receive a 5% assignment pay rather than $40 per pay period. The tuition reimbursement amounts have been increased to $1,700 for a bachelor's degree and $1,800 for a master's degree. Juneteenth was added as a pay holiday, as per previously approved by the council. And we also implemented a vacation sellback program for the officers where they can sell back up to 80 hours of vacation in a calendar year so long as they have utilized the same. Also, the union is here if you have any questions.
Well, I just want to say that, this has been an extraordinary 18 months. I want to thank our police department, Mr. McMullen. I appreciate your bargaining in good faith. I'm really proud of our force. I think we're the best in the business. They do exemplary work, and I think this is a fair contract for all involved. But I want to thank you for the process. Do you have something you'd like to say?
If you don't mind. I just wanted to, Mr. Mayor, Council, just wanted to thank you guys for your support in this contract negotiation. And the HR director, she's been amazing. Her and her team it's been a real professional, good learning experience with the contract negotiations. So I just wanted to thank you guys for your support.
Thank you. Thanks. Questions? Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, I just had a question about the vacation sellback program. I didn't see too many details through the contract, but I was just wondering if you can describe the sellback program. Is it to add to retirement days, or is it to get cash back, or what is it?
Yeah, so no, it's not to add to retirement days. This does not increase their vacation accrual at all. Rather, we implemented this because, as the mayor said, it's been a rough 18 months. And so between both the pandemic and then what's going on across the country in terms of police departments, we've had some staffing impacts. So they've handled it amazingly. But as a result, a lot of our officers are not asking for the vacation time, right, because of what that does. And so this provides them an opportunity to where they have to utilize some vacation, because vacation is not meant to be a bank account. But it does provide them the opportunity to sell back some of their vacation so long as they have used it as well. So it's a vacation self-funding. So they have to take some vacation to be able to cash out some vacation. And it also does provide there to be safety nets involved to where they can't deplete everything that's in their account. So it's really meant to help the officers be able to utilize their vacation time, as well as the department through these staffing challenges.
And our police officers will take a minimum of how many weeks of vacation per year then?
So they have to take 80 hours to be able to cash out the 80 hours.
Okay.
Y'all need to recharge your batteries every once in a
Yeah,
while.
oh my gosh.
Any other questions or comments? I also want to thank the chief who's in the audience. Consent?
Yes.
All right, item 4.2.
Approve the collective bargaining agreement as negotiated between the City of Clearwater and Fraternal Order of Police Clearwater Supervisors Bargaining Unit for fiscal years 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023, 2023, 2024, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same as Pier.
Hello again. So similar, the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Clearwater and the FOP supervisors expires on September 30th of 2021, and we have reached a tentative agreement to which the union has ratified that agreement as well. This is a 3-year agreement that provides for a 3% general wage increase for all 3 years and a 4% pay range adjustment for all 4 years as well, and a step increase of 4% for all 3 years. In addition, it provides for the following changes. The standby pay in this contract has also been increased to $50 per work day and $100 for the weekend. The community policing squad will now receive 5% assignment pay rather than $40 per pay period. We also increased the tuition reimbursement in this contract as well for $1,700 for a bachelor's degree and $2,000 for a master's degree. This contract also had Juneteenth added and has the same vacation sellback program implemented as well.
Any questions? Consent? 5.1.
Thank you.
Renew grant and fiscal assistance agreement between the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the City of Clearwater, necessary to facilitate a current mutual aid agreement between the two entities effective upon execution through June 30th, 2022, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Chief Slaughter.
Chief Slaughter, the Police Department, this is a renewal agreement that the state requires to be completed every year upon their approved budget, and it's a companion agreement to our participation for the Electronic Surveillance Support Team, or ESST. The agreement provides for a mechanism for the reimbursement of overtime, for training expenses, for vehicle use, and that are encumbered by the city as part of the ESST. The maximum amount of the reimbursement is $12,500 per member, which we have one member that participates on this team, and so it is required to come to council because of the financial aspect. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the chief? Councilmember Beckman.
Just a learning, like, how many years have we received the grant?
So it's not that we received the grant, it's that the state uses grant funds to reimburse us. So they get the grant, but we've been participating in this team for probably 7 years. It's been a while.
Okay, and so we normally use all the funds that are we don't use that maximum that's allocated if we only have one person?
So we get reimbursed for what we spend, and generally, quite honestly, no. It's like, I think last year, or this current year, I think we're somewhere around the 2,000 mark as far as reimbursement.
Okay.
We don't encumber a lot. It's just a maximum. And another reason it triggers, there's a mechanism if the city receives state grant funds in excess of $750,000 total, not just the police department, but all the programs across, it has to trigger like an audit, so that's another reason it's tracked the way it is.
Thank you.
Consent?
Yep.
5.2.
Authorize the trade-in to GT Distributors, Inc. of Austin, Texas for 21 used Glock 42 pistols with 2 magazines and True Glow sights in the trade-in amount of $5,859 pursuant to City Code of Ordinances 2.6236, and 7E, disposition of surplus tangible personal property, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Chief Slaughter.
So the police department is seeking to trade in 21 used Glock 42s with their 2 magazines for the dollar amount Mr. Maxwell stated. The Glock 42 is a concealable .380 handgun that has been assigned to our plainclothes personnel. They were purchased in 2015. They're coming up due for kind of a maintenance overhaul, but this trade-in opportunity presented itself. So we'd like to transition the plainclothes personnel to a Glock 43X, which is a 9mm caliber, which is the same caliber as our duty handgun, and use the trade-in credit to facilitate this purchase. The total amount of the purchase for the 43X Glocks is $8,084.31. We'll also be purchasing new fixed-mounted lights to the handgun itself that come to a total of $2,177.40. Once you subtract the credit from the Glock 42s, there's a $5,859 credit, so the total purchase amount would be $4,402.71. We'll be trading in 21, but only purchasing 19, and due to the fact that it's being surplus and traded, it had to come to council.
Questions for the chief? Vice Mayor.
So this is approving the purchase of the new ones as well as the trade-in, because the verbiage of the agenda item just refers to the trade-in, the turning in of the older Glocks.
Yeah, since the purchase price is less than $5,000, that doesn't have to come to council, but of course, obviously, well, as the body could say no. It's actually the surplus aspect of this transaction that requires the council approval.
Thank you.
Councilmember Albrecht.
Is the guns you're trading in, did you say they were 380s?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely the 9mm is a preferred caliber, and the concealable nature of some of the new 9s is much more efficient than it had been in the past.
Yeah, they're about the size of the 380s.
Councilmember Beckman.
Another learning, I don't know if this is a typo or if it's just, in the text it says there's a weapon-mounted lighting system for undercover personnel. Is it supposed to be lighting? And what's a weapon-mounted lighting?
So, and I don't know if the text is in the agenda item or what you're referring to, but
In the legislative text, yeah.
so what it is that the 43X actually has a rail where you can affix a mounted light to it. So that handgun has that additional feature, which the current 42 does not. So, yeah, I mean, we're purchasing lights that will affix to that. I'd have to look at the verbiage to see exactly, but that's what it's referring to. It's that additional
Pull out
feature.
a gun, there's a light on the end of it?
Yeah, the officers, I don't carry one, but the duty officers have one as well. And so it's something that you toggle with your finger. Obviously, in our scenario or in our business, there's many low light scenarios, and the last thing you want them to do is fumbling with a flashlight and a handgun at the same time. So it's a safety thing.
Consent? 5.3.
Approve a contract with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Largo, Florida, in the amount not to exceed $599,530, which includes a contingency for forensic crime scene processing, latent prints, property and evidence storage, and Pinellas Juvenile Assessment Center services during the one-year contract period commencing on October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same to slaughter.
This is a renewal agreement every time around budget, the budget renewal that we have to bring forward. It provides our ancillary services in the form of crime scene processing, latent fingerprint evaluations, property and evidence storage, and admissions to the Pinellas Juvenile Assessment Center. The total amount of the contract is $599,530. Total when you add in the contingency. It is a 3.2 increase from the previous year. There's 1,100 calls for forensic processing at an individual rate of $254.71. 1,200 cases of fingerprint processing for a total, or at a individual rate of $93.63. Property and evidence storage, 10,000 items at $13.14. And then the individual admission to the Pinellas County Juvenile Assessment Center at $84 each. The additional contingency just provides us the opportunity, if we run past those numbers, to be able to purchase them without coming back for council. What happens more likely is if there is unused services, we actually receive a refund that goes into the general fund, and that is what's happened in the last couple of years. More than happy to answer your questions.
Questions for the chief? Consent? 6.1.
Approve a purchase order to CDW Government LLC of Vernon Hills, Illinois, in the amount of $382,110 for the purchase of Fortinet hardware, software, and maintenance pursuant to City of Code Ordinances 2.5631C piggyback, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Mayor.
Mayor, council members, Dan Mayer, Information Technology. This is a renewal of our maintenance for our firewall system that protects our network, and it's also a purchase of additional firewalls as we facilitate the development of the Real-Time Crime Center. We're going to segment that off so it can interact with the public differently from the rest of our operations.
Questions for Mr. Mayor? Consent? 6.2.
Authorize a purchase order to the State of Florida Department of Management Services, contract DMS 0809-071 for Suncom long-distance service, state AIN, Centranet lines, and toll-free lines in an amount not to exceed $164,220 for the period October 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2022, pursuant to Clearwater Code of Ordinances, Section 2.5631C, piggyback or cooperative purchasing, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Mayor.
Council, this is our old copper lines that we use at numerous locations, as well as some of the other services we get off of state contracts, an annual renewal. So I'll answer any questions you have.
Questions? Consent?
Yep.
7.1, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Authorize a purchase order to Stoll's Door Company, DBA Overhead Door of Clearwater, Florida, for maintenance, repair, and replacement of overhead security doors in the not-to-exceed amount of $625,000 from May 23rd, 2021 through March 11th, 2026 pursuant to Clearwater Code of Ordinances, Section 2.563 1C cooperative contracts, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Gloucester.
Good morning. Earl Gloucester, Director, Solid Waste General Services. The City of Clearwater, City of Indian Rocks Beach, Town of Indian Shores, the City of Osmer, and the City of Tarpon Springs were cooperative bidders in this solicitation. 2 bids were received. Stoll's Door was the lowest responsible bidder. The cooperative contract has 1 additional 2-year renewal at the city's discretion. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Gloucester? Vice Mayor.
On Overhead Door, Clearwater I'm very familiar with their work. They're the ones to go to for this kind of stuff, but the dates of this contract are kind of odd. It's like retroactive back to May and ending on March 11th, and I'm just the dates of the contract are kind of odd. What are because normally it's from on an annual basis with a, 365-day annual contract. What's the reason for the odd dates on this?
I can't really answer that for you right now. I can get an answer for you, but I don't know the answer to that question.
They just struck me as odd. So.
Any other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
So this is a cooperative contract, which means that amount is just our contribution with those other
That's our projected spend on an annual basis of $125,000 per year over the 5-year period.
Okay.
For maintenance, preventive maintenance, repairs, and replacements.
But we're getting buying power.
Yes.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about with that kind of smaller number and this type of work, that maybe it would be good for a small business, minority-owned business, but if we're pooling, if all those cities are coming together to contract with somebody that can handle that larger load, then that might answer why it's not a small minority-owned women business. Okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments? Consent?
Yep.
7.2.
Approve a purchase order to Pinellas County Solid Waste Management for the disposal of solid waste at the Pinellas County Waste to Energy Plant Landfill for the term October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022 in a not-to-exceed amount of $4,508,000 pursuant to Clearwater Code of Ordinances 2.5631A, single source, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Gloucester.
Pinellas County Solid Waste, this is where all of our refuse goes, where the majority of it, the putrescible refuse goes that we collect here in the city. Questions?
We haven't had tipping fee increases and compared to what Hillsborough, aren't we?
Oh, we have had increases, sir. Yes,
Have
sir.
we?
The last, starting in 2019, they had a rate study that pretty much told them that they had to start increasing rates. So they started increasing rates in 2019. We had an increase in 2020, and we're looking at another increase October 1st of this year.
Weren't they at $37.50?
They were at $37.50 for about 20 years. Yes, sir.
And Hillsborough is what, over 100?
They are around $80 a ton.
Just something our citizens ought to know.
We're a lot lower, going to $44 a ton effective October 1st. We're at $42.15 right now.
Questions? Councilmember Beckman?
So I learned what putrescribe is.
Putrescible?
Oh, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce it?
Putrescible.
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 Okay.
Garbage that putresces.
Yes, waste containing organic matter that is liable to rapid degradation by microorganisms. Okay.
That's correct.
And then I sort of figure out Angelo's is for curbside large items they pick up. Is that what Angelo's does? We contract with them?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's not yard waste or recycles, it's like furniture pieces and things, but not electronics.
Right.
Okay. And And then I have a question, is recycling available to all businesses? Any
We
businesses?
offer it,
Okay.
yes, to all businesses, yes.
All businesses, all right. Okay. And then how do the rates compare for commercial and residential? I can learn that from you some other time?
How do they compare?
Yeah, like recycle rates. So here's what I was thinking of. I had a meeting with Chrissy with St. Vincent de Paul, who runs the soup kitchen, and they provide meals, and she was saying they have a whole lot of recycles, cans and cardboard and things like that. But she doesn't have recycle right now, so she'd have to decide to pay for a recycle container there. Because she's kind of a small operation, would she be able to use the blue and yellow ones like we all use, or does she have to get a commercial one?
For St. Vincent de Paul, I believe she'd be able to get a card, yes.
Smaller ones? Okay. And would that, because she's a nonprofit or a business, would she be paying the same rate as I do as a resident? Is it based on the size of the
The
container?
commercial rate, right? Okay, that would be a commercial rate.
Is that a little higher or a little
Yes,
lower?
it's higher.
It's a little higher, okay. All right, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Consent?
Yep.
7.3.
Authorized purchase orders to Angelo's Recycled Materials of St. Petersburg, Florida, and Consolidated Resource Recovery, Inc. of Sarasota, Florida, for yard waste, Class 3 waste, and construction demolition debris disposal in a not-to-exceed amount of $3,900,000 for the term October 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2024, pursuant to Clearwater Code of Ordinances, Section 2.5631C, cooperative purchasing, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Johnson.
Morning, Mr. Mayor, Council. The item before you allows the department to continue to provide collection and disposal service for both residential and commercial customers for the final disposal of yard waste, construction and demolition debris, Class 3, which is basic junk, to continue in that regard. I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Any questions?
Basic junk, the technical term?
No, Class 3 is the technical term. Basic junk is the common term.
There we go.
Try to
Consent?
inject some sophistication whenever possible.
Yeah.
7.4.
Authorize a purchase order to Waste Quip Manufacturing Company, LLC of Charlotte, North Carolina, for the purchase of roll-off containers, compactors, and compactor parts in a not-to-exceed amount of $1,284,000 for a term October 1, 2021 through June 2nd, 2025, pursuant to Clearwater Code of Ordinance Section 2.5631C, piggyback contract, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Johnson.
Brian Johnson, Assistant Director, Solid Waste General Services. Morning, Mayor and Council. This item provides for the purchase of the equipment and parts needed by the department to continue providing commercial and industrial waste collection through the use of compactors, roll-off containers, as opposed to dumpsters. I'm available for questions.
Any questions? Consent?
Yep.
8.1. Thank you, gentlemen.
Approve the restrictive covenant required by the state of Florida for a cultural facilities grant awarded to Ruth Eckerd Hall, Inc., and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Chris Cook, Senior Manager, Parks and Recreation. We all know and are very proud of the partnership we've had with Ruth Eckerd Hall for all the events and programs and educational opportunities they've offered to residents and visitors here in Clearwater. During this time of the pandemic, it hasn't stopped their creativity in looking at ways to continue their growth in those programs. They've acquired a $250,000 grant from the state of Florida. Part of that grant and that appropriation is to create an outdoor theater they're going to call the England Family Music Garden, which will allow them to be outside and offer some additional space and programs that socially distance and all those sorts of things. As the owner, we will be required to approve this restricted covenant, stating that the facility will be used for cultural programs. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions? Want to thank the Englands. They also donated $750,000 to make this happen, so it's great to get the money from the state, but want to recognize those private donors. Consent?
Yes.
9.1.
Reappoint Clearwater Housing Board with a term to expire September 30, 2025. Council members, in your agenda pack, you had a copy of his appointment. This is one that is done by the mayor, that is preferred by the city council.
And there were some other interested parties. I have talked to them and explained why I'm recommending Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith has been on the board. He's an architect, and Clearwater Housing has some large projects coming up, and his particular background and expertise is going to be beneficial. I know that Councilmember Beckman had somebody, and I did talk to him, Mr. Wicks did, I believe. And him and I had a conversation, and he understood exactly why. He said I would agree with that, so. Any other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, I have, so, one of my big interests is advisory boards and engaging them and utilizing them better than what we are right now. And one of the ways I think that might help is if, when people are reappointed or up for reappointment for an advisory board position, and I'm not, singling out this gentleman at all, but I think they should be invited to resubmit their application. They are.
They are, as you will see, all the items on today's agenda, all of the reappointments or those individuals seeking reappointment to have an application. We always try to get them to submit a new one. If it's happened within, let's say they were appointed to fill an unexpired term of a year, we may use the one that they submitted, but we will still contact them if they would like to update it. But otherwise, we always have the application on file.
Okay, so this gentleman's been on this board for 8 years, and this is the application that he's chosen to submit. Yeah, I mean, I think we can do better with people wanting to be reappointed, telling us what they've done, what they've brought to the board, how they've, I saw that Mr. Leon has done that for the EAB, but when I looked, like, for example, at Camille Heptig's for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, I mean, hers still listed her employment as the Clearwater Ferry. And I know, because I attend the advisory boards, that, I know that she does a good job. She serves as chair of that advisory board. But I wouldn't necessarily know that if she just kept her application the same. Or I wouldn't know if I didn't attend these advisory board meetings, which I'm attending. So I think maybe I'll suggest it for a future work session to really talk about our advisory board members, what they're contributing, and how we're informed of what they're doing. You know what I mean? Just before a automatic reappointment.
Well, I think they're filling out the applications as necessary, so the applications are complete, technically.
Mm-hmm.
You may not like the detail of them.
Or
And-
back off, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
but if that's the case, we need to set the expectations.
right,
Because they are, in fact, completing the application. It may not have as much color as to why we should appoint them over somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's our expectation, we need to communicate that.
I agree.
I don't know that that's their fault. I can tell you on Mr. Smith, I actually had board members call me and ask me to reappoint him because they think he's that important to keep around.
Great, that's good.
So consent on him?
Yes.
9.2.
One member to the Environmental Advisory Board with a term to expire September 30, 2025. Council members, in your agenda pack, you have an application for the current chair, Mr. Jared Leon, who is interested in being reappointed and is able to serve another term. You also had applications for Erica Escamilla, Dina Stanley, Sheila Sullivan, Nicholas West, and Nicholas West.
I think Mr. Leon deserves another term. But
Jared's a perfect fit on this board, really. He does a great job.
Yeah,
Councilmember Beckman?
Sure. My comments are, yes, I think Jared's done a great job. I've been at many, many meetings, and he's led very well. And as I look at the other applicants, here's what I would say. Thank you for applying. Please show up at the EAB meetings and make your voice heard. You get to bring forth initiatives, you get to engage with the board members, you can question, you can play a very, very active role as a resident who is engaged with these advisory boards. You don't need to be sitting up here. And more often than not, when I go to advisory board meetings, whether it's this one or the Parks and Rec or the Marine or the Air Park, nobody's in the audience. And so another thing, I think, again, when you, and this might be a collective direction, but when you fill out an application, say, I've attended a number of meetings. I've spoke about this, this, and this. I'm excited to do this, this, and this. And just because you're not appointed doesn't mean you can't play a huge part and make a difference.
Am I hearing consensus for
Yes.
Mr. Leon? Consent?
Yes.
9.3.
Reappoint Camille Hepton to the Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board with a term to expire September 30, 2025. Council members, she is interested in being reappointed and is also the only applicant we have on file.
Consent?
Yep.
10.1.
Appoint David Margolis as the city attorney effective October 25th, 2021, and approve an employment agreement with him. Council, on October 21st, you unanimously agreed to offer Mr. Margolis the position of city attorney upon my retirement. And you authorized me to negotiate an employment agreement. The only exception from our agreement that we had proposed and the conditions that were listed in the that we sent out when we were soliciting the city attorney was he asked for an additional 30 days accrual on the leave time. Our accrual cap is normally 90 days. Because the severance is less than both than I previously had been able to have, he had asked for a higher accrual date amount to
We
120
fixed that
days.
other glitch, though, in the contract, that I would consider a glitch.
A glitch. I'm sorry.
If one of you left, the contract that Mr. Horn and you had, that has been changed.
The severance is now the statutory severance, which is 20 weeks.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Aiken? Anything? No? Consent?
Yep.
Any questions about second readings, 10.2 through 10.6? 11.1.
City Center Development Group update, Mr. Delk.
Mayor, Council, Michael Delk, Assistant City Manager. I wanted to publicly kind of update you on what we notified you last week of the Center City Development Group, Mr. Govan and his team withdrawing their request. A couple of comments that I wanted to make with regard to that is that I think both sides, we went back and forth on the development of the concept plan, pursuing a term sheet that we both were comfortable with for a couple of months, certainly beyond our original anticipated schedule. We were not able to do that for a number of reasons, and in my last conversation with Mr. Govan, it just appeared as though from a philosophical perspective we were not going to be able to kind of come to a meeting of the minds, mainly with regard to a matter that was you expressed as being important from day one, which was the extent of the parking structure and garage on the Harborview site. We struggle with that. I think we
always reiterated that we want Mr. Govan and City Center Development Group to be successful. We always also expressed that our priorities for Harborview site were activated retail and public space and not a structured parking garage, and that our intention was to add that infrastructure later on. During some of the iterations, as we got closer to the end, we couldn't really get away from the 5 to somewhere between 500 and 600 space parking garage in terms of number. It really impacted the usability and the design of the structure itself. For example, the city's downtown guidelines call for some activation of the Osceola right-of-way frontage. And that was really limited by design of the accommodation of the parking garage behind the facility. So we had gotten to the point where we had some more kind of itinerant or flex space, if you will, located kind of really near the right-of-way in the sidewalk area. But really the garage design itself and the ramping system internal to it wouldn't allow us to provide really any kind of retail storefront for consideration along Osceola Boulevard. And so I think, at that point we felt like it was, we just weren't going to be successful, and we didn't want to incur any more time and expense for Mr. Govan and his team, who were, we think they had a good team, but we just simply weren't able to get over that struggle. And so the one other comment I want to make about the proposal generally, or maybe two, was that, reality was that somewhere this might have been kind of the low end of the threshold in terms of the intensity and density that we were hoping to get on the bluff sites. We were a little concerned about some of the other proposals, maybe going a bit too far the other direction, knowing that we want our community to ultimately feel good about what we bring to them for a referendum. The other thing is I heard some comments along the way that the housing component was a quote-unquote affordable housing there, and I think some of the other downtown residents and that sort of thing expressed some concern about that. I think we were not looking for, nor did we articulate in the RFP, a request for affordable housing for this site, mainly because of the land costs involved and that sort of thing. We wanted this to be a market sustainable properties, both for the City Hall and the Pier Street sites, recognizing that we may have much more involved public-private partnership on the Harborview site to get what we want. While the rent structures were really kind of at the top of the Clearwater market, you could make the case that they were pretty strong workforce housing rents, but nevertheless, that was some comments I heard over the last couple of months from some of our other constituents in the downtown area. So I think that gives us something to keep in mind as we go forward and look really at what the future activation of these properties will be. And finally, I want to say that the properties are still, obviously, technically, they're available. Someone could come in this afternoon, propose something for us that we thought would be really attractive and be attractive to our community in terms of their support, and we could recommence the process. So we don't have to have a formal RFP issued out there, and to the extent that maybe we're just premature on the market a little bit. I think some of your comments have suggested that once the park gets a little further along, we might be in a stronger position from an economic development standpoint to attract the kind of users that we want. So on balance, after considering all of that, we certainly accepted the withdrawal. Mr. Govan recognized why he chose not to move forward with the process. I think we would concur with that at this point. And so what I'll do is maybe talk to staff about the extent to which we want to keep these properties out there in front of the public as opportunities. I don't know that we need to necessarily market them real aggressively. That's a choice that we can make and that you have if you have a feeling about that one way or the other. But we can certainly, there's no reason for them to be hid or, kind of off the table, if you will. They are opportunities. They exist today. They'll exist tomorrow and through the duration of this project. And then we'll decide at some point in time if we want to make a more formal appeal for reconsideration of the three sites collectively or how that works out. Really, the ball's in our court. And all of our options remain open. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you for the update. I want to thank City Center. I know that there was a lot of work expended by them and also by you and Ms. Aiken and other staff members. I think everybody bargained in good faith. And I'm glad that we're making it clear to people that the door is not shut. Should a great opportunity come along between now and the opening of Imagine Clearwater, it's something that we could entertain. But I do believe as we start to go vertical and people see the project coming out of the ground that's to our west, they're going to realize the opportunity, and that might open new windows of opportunity to us. So I'm really excited about that. I also think this is going to give us a little bit more time to communicate with the public about maybe what they do and do not want to see on those two parcels, because obviously the Harborview and the City Hall site are going to have to go to referendum, and then we also have the CMA site, which does not. But I think this gives us an opportunity through the strategic planning program that we might have that as a component to get a better idea of what people envision for that site. I know what I want to see. I want it to be an economic engine, but we also have to make certain that it's something that's going to be accepted by the citizens. So with that, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Delk. Anything else, Mr. Maxwell?
No, Mayor.
Ms. Aiken, anything?
No, sir.
Council discussion items. City roll and paint your heart out. Amount of support expected from city departments. Councilmember Beckman.
Thank you. So I've had the privilege of being part of the Paint Your Heart Out board when I was appointed last year. And I love this organization, even though I've only been there a year. But we had a great year last year, painting a number of houses in the city for people who can't afford to have their homes painted, or they have disabilities that preclude them from doing that. I fielded 2 teams last year. It was a lot of fun. We had a team from the city that painted a house. I think DeEunice headed up that team, which was some different people with the city. Jennifer, did you paint? Yeah. And yeah. Did Joelle paint too? Is it? I don't remember. Okay. So anyway, it was a great day. So what I've learned is this is the 29th year that this has been going on. It involved, the city has coordinated with other organizations, private businesses, and painted over 350 homes, involved thousands of volunteers. It's a little different. The city, as I've learned, we do the United Way Day of Caring, which is wonderful, but that's paid. I mean, that's part of a work day. This is strictly volunteer. It really feels like a Habitat for Humanity work day. It's not bad. It's 6 hours. You show up, they have all the supplies, and you paint, and you get to know people, first of all, that you're painting with, as well as the homeowner, who is, very grateful and engaged, and it's just a real rewarding project. And so as we go forward, it seems like, as I've learned, there was a lot more city engagement in the earlier years. In fact, some people, as I learned in the city, would go out and do some minor repairs, whether it's screens or scraping or shoring up something that they were going to paint. And that's kind of shifted. We don't do that as much or at all anymore. I think we contract with the Paint Your Heart Out organization, has some pressure washing, cleaning, maybe cutting some shrubbery around where you have to paint, and then the volunteers show up. I think it was 8 a.m. on a Saturday, and we're done by 1 o'clock. And so what we're asking for is some robust promotion from the city to invite city employees to participate in whatever way they want. And so promotion would be great. It would, the feedback that I've received, and I have Tony McGannis, I hope I pronounced your name right, Tony. Got your name written down here. McGannis, yeah, Tony McGannis.
He's been called worse.
Who works with Clearwater Gas, who's kind of headed it up. He's on, the meetings. He and Samantha Alvarez run this organization. And so I invited him to be here if you had any questions that maybe I couldn't answer. But, you know, I think we have a great opportunity to really re-engage and invite departments and the city employees to participate in this. I would think this year, as I've learned more, I can reach out to the CNC, the NAACP, maybe some local schools. We had Dr. Nicole Carr worked on one of our houses last year. So we have some, you know, real diversity there. And I was thinking too, with our new city attorney and city manager, how great it would be to have them work on a house or be there or make the rounds as the mayor does to thank volunteers and just really have a coming together, kind of unifying opportunity. It really isn't asking that much if we do 10 or 12 houses and do we have like 8 or 10 people on a house? But anyway, I wanted to know your thoughts on that, and if you have any questions specific, Mr. McGannis is here. And I've supplied you some letters over the years. You know, different people have written and thanked the city and the Paint Your Heart Out organization, and it really is. I don't know if you've volunteered with Habitat, but it's that kind of a feeling. It's just an easy give back. It really is.
Vice Mayor?
Well, no, the program itself is a great program, but I'm not totally familiar with all of the financial aspects of Paint Your Heart. How much money do they need to operate and do their program? And I don't want this to sound wrong, but, you know, it's kind of, you know, Paint Your Heart, it builds, you know, a lot of camaraderie and community and whatnot, but the final product is kind of like a 9-year-old putting makeup on when it's done. You don't have professional painters and everything doing the work. My question is, you know, what is the financial aspect of it? Could we get a better product by contracting, spending the same amount of money, contracting with a professional painting contractor who would agree to do 10 houses a year for this much money, and we would have the people apply, and based on their level of need and restrictions would qualify for it. They would get a better final product, but you don't have the camaraderie, the other part of it. I'm looking for quality, but also, you know, don't get me wrong, I think Paint Your Heart Out is a great thing, and it can do it. I mean, I've done 3 different Habitat builds, but and I've done Paint Your Heart Out for numerous times back when I was first on and everything else, but it just, I mean, I'm not a good painter. Paintbrush in my hand is not a positive, and but, you know, I'm looking to get the best final product for the same amount of financial commitment that the city makes. What is the city's financial commitment, I guess? Do we put $30,000 in to buy the paint from whoever the paint supplier is?
I mean, we have paint professionals that are supposed to guide some of the people. Mr. McGannis, you want to come forward?
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Paint Your Heart actually financially to the city does not cost anything other than my time that I do during business hours if I answer phone calls or attend meetings. Sanitation does go through and pick up any additional waste. Previously to the past 10 years, I'd say there was more city involvement. Robin Gomez, the auditor, was running the organization, so there was obviously additional times with him. But as far as financial impact, $0. And it is all sponsored by corporations. As far as the cost for the homes, we're talking about $300 to $350 per home to paint those homes. Yes, the quality is not to the standards of a professional painter, but at the same time, the investment in team building for each one of those organizations or any department that participates is priceless. Additionally, the So if you take the professional painter, he's not going to be $300, $350. The beautification of the neighborhood, the neighbors that appreciate it, the homeowners that appreciate it. Like Councilmember Beckman mentioned earlier, these are people that need the additional hand up. So I see that as something that we've proudly put our names to for the past 30 years almost, and I'd like to see us continue doing that. I'd like to expand our involvement as a city, to be quite honest. Pre-2010 participation where each department kind of had an internal competition amongst themselves participating. Council members joined teams, city management joined teams. So it was something that really brought the opportunity for new employees that joined the city. That's why I love the program when I first joined the city. I got to meet so many different people quickly, and I actually felt valued to be part of the city of Clearwater. So there's other little token gestures that are involved in this program.
I mean, I think it can be more robust. It used to be. I mean, you mentioned a couple things. There used to be even houses where people went in and did landscaping and raked up lawns and, you know, did all sorts of things. I would love to, you know, encourage our employees to be a part of this, but unless we're going to pay them on the weekend, we don't have the authority to ask them to participate. Ms. Poyer, would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
So I guess Councilmember Beckman, first of all, I think it's a great program. Been involved with it, you know, the entire time I was elected, even did years when I wasn't on a team. What's your ask?
My ask is that the communications department maybe promote it and advertise it throughout, you know, our intranet or within the city. And without, you know, I mean, we could offer it to other groups, other organizations within the city. So some communication efforts. And then I guess from the, and Micah, I guess from the leadership team to just ask, and maybe Tony and Samantha and whoever could develop a little flyer, just ask department heads, directors to present it to their employees as this is going on November, what is it, November 8th or 9th?
November 6th.
Oh, 6th, November 6th. If you'd like to do it, and if you have any questions, you can contact Tony or Samantha or whatever. But that's simply it. It's just ask, right, Tony? Anything else?
That's basically it. I was going to extend an ask for possibly housing some of the materials, because the last couple of years, we have not had that location to house, possibly, we're talking about less than 100 square feet. I was thinking maybe to reach out to Chief Slaughter and ask if we can use the Countryside Library. I think there's areas of that that's not being occupied. That's the only thing I would probably ask in addition to what Councilmember Beckman asked for.
Well, let's find the best place to house it. I don't know where that is. I think we'll leave that to Mr. Maxwell. Okay.
And Mike, you said $300 to $350 per house is the cost. Where does that money go? Do you get that from different, I mean, are we actively out there looking for corporate sponsors to sponsor this home? And this
board members on Paint Your Heart Out actively pursue that. So one of our main sponsors is Publix. Bouchard Insurance is another one. There's several organizations. I think that 15 to 20 organizations that donate some funding for it. They also, part of their funding helps them build a team. So they usually, if they put a monetary value to the donation, they actually have a team that participates also, or sponsors another team.
And do we have anybody that does like prep of the home before the Saturday, like pressure washing or anything of that?
That is something we do. We usually do some prep work on our own through the city, but that was once again before 2010. For the last few years, we've been hiring a contractor, and he does, I think it's anywhere from $35 to $50 a home, depending on the size of it, to power wash it. Okay. Then the day of the event, most participants, there's usually about 12 to 18 participants per home. Some will do some minor yard work, landscaping type work. The rest will be doing prep work and painting the house, clean up.
Mr. Maxwell?
I just wanted to clarify the city involvement. There is some staff involvement also at the housing level. ED&H helps with the selection of the homes, those sorts of things. So there is some staff time on that side too. I just wanted to make sure you all are aware of that exists in addition to what Mr. McGannis expressed.
That is correct.
To my knowledge, there is no monetary gift.
I'd like to add that once we do select homes, there is, PD does verify background check for each location. And then code enforcement also is a contributor. But usually they also recommend homes to code enforcement because they're the ones that drive through their neighborhoods and identify needy locations.
Yeah, and that's important. I remember one year I went to a house in Morningside and it was my dentist's mother, which I found a little irritating. He said he really appreciated the paid job on her house. And I asked him, why didn't you pay for it? He didn't think that was that great. Anyway, we want to make sure it's the right people. So what's the target this year?
As far as how many homes?
Yes.
We're looking for 10 to 12 homes again.
Okay. You know, I listened to your list. I mean, if you're not reaching out to churches, that's also a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of them that can bring in huge amounts of people to do things. Right. I mean, we do it at our church and we'll have 300 people come out and do a similar type deal, but they'll do landscaping and painting and you name it. So if you're not asking those organizations, you're missing out.
And the CNC, I think, you know, get it out, advertise with them, and all the homeowner organizations, civic associations and so forth. They have a lot of people that want to be civically involved, you know, they want to do something for their community.
Well, I think the main drive here is if we do, we'd like to have a little bit more additional city support. It's the team building aspect. I mean, there are very few opportunities to have within departments. You know, if a volunteer group from each department does participate, it is an opportunity to team build and just get outside of your normal operations. So that's one thing that is a good benefit that really, it doesn't cost the city anything additional. So that's just one point I want to point out, please.
Very good. Thank you for all you do,
Thank you,
Tony.
sir.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
13.2, one pager for Green Print 2.0.
Yes, I was hoping that we could give staff direction, but in my meeting with Micah this week, I guess it's already in process, right?
That's correct. Sheridan's been working on it, and she's here to.
Right.
I mean, I think we all agreed to that, to distill it down as much as you can. Ms. Boyle?
Good morning, Sheridan Boyle, Sustainability Coordinator. So yeah, we have completed a draft and we're working with public communications to finalize it.
Do we have a target that, like, within a month, you think, or something?
I don't want to speak for the department, but it's in their hands. It should be fairly simple. So depending on their workload.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item 13.3.
Okay, so this one is, and I had sent you some stuff over the weekend too, and then forwarded it to our city attorney and city clerk. But I was hoping that we could give direction to staff to begin to investigate and formulate some EV ordinances, EV-ready ordinances, either with land development or building development. And you know, this coincides with our goals we have on Green Print, so it's certainly not out of line. And I just don't think, in understanding the timeline of the comprehensive plan and reviewing it, adopting it, enacting it, all that stuff into 2023, I don't want to wait that long. I know that our staff is taxed and capacity is an issue, but we have so much new building going on, residential, these, you know, the affordable housing that's going on Lincoln and Cleveland, Washington, and I think we just need to make sure that this is front and center instead of asking all the time. Are you, building for EV? How many EV chargers are you going to have? All that. It just needs to be standard operating procedure, I hope. And multiple cities across the country already have these kinds of things. So I was hoping we could give staff direction to begin to investigate and bring something forward.
Vice Mayor?
Well, if other cities have got it, I'd like to see where they are on it, because to me, when I look at this, this is a real moving target, because I think back 10 years ago, and when Chevrolet came out with the first Volt, it could go about 60 miles on a charge. And then and that was like, oh, it was great. Hey, it's an all-electric vehicle, but it can only go 60 miles. Well, the new ones are doing 300 and 400 miles to a charge. What are they going to be doing in 10 more years with the technology improvements? You know, are they going to be going twice that in 10 more years? And almost everybody who purchases an electric vehicle also has, through that purchase and planning or whatever, has a charging unit at their residence. So with a 400-mile, 300, 400-mile distance to travel on a charge, how necessary are EV charging stations in town or whatever? Apartment units, new apartment units, if, you know, this becomes an issue for the actual, the people that are going to own the apartments. Is like, okay, if I'm going to market my units to the millennials and the people that are going to be buying the electric vehicles, then I need to put charging stations in my new apartments. Affordable housing apartments, are they as necessary in an affordable housing? Because I don't see people in affordable housing driving a lot of electric vehicles. I mean, that's why I say this is a moving target, and I don't know that there's a standard, this is how many charging units you have to have per this many units. If another city has it, I'd love to see it. I don't know. I just, you know, it's, for local use, I mean, how often do you need to find a charging station in Clearwater for your vehicle? Probably rarely, if ever, because you charge at home and you can get around town with no problem. So that's kind of the moving target I see with EVs. I don't. I mean, I want to be. You know, when we get more people, I guess, with EVs, and then, but again, I drive the beach all the time, and we have tourists out there all the time. There's not a lot of electric vehicles on the beach with out-of-state license plates. I mean, most of them are local, you know, Florida license plates, because to me, if I own an electric vehicle and I'm going to drive long distance, you almost have to say, well, I need to stop at this exit and I have to charge my car, instead of just, hey, if I'm in my car, I can just pull off at any exit. There's a gas station at every one. I can fill up, and in 10 minutes I'm back on the road. But you know, that's kind of a shift in thinking for in the future when there's going to be more and more electric vehicles. But again, I'm going to stop at saying, you know, what my opening statement, this is a moving target, and I don't really know how to, you know, put a hard number on any of it, and I'd love to see what some other cities have done if they have done that.
Councilmember Albrecht.
So I kind of agree that the same thing. It's a little early. I agree that probably we'll be getting into it soon. I don't have an electric vehicle. I've thought about it. Don't each manufacturer have a different connection with their car? Would that be a problem? I would be up for hearing about, you know, the possibility of it, because I'm just not versed in it. So I would be okay with opening it up with a discussion on it to see if the viability of it.
Councilmember Bunker.
I'd like to have a similar discussion. I think it's important for us to look into this. It is, you know, the world is changing, and all the car manufacturers are going to electric. So we are going to need to have stations everywhere. And I think the federal government really needs to be a huge factor in that. But if we can find local ordinances that deal with this, that might be a guide and bring in somebody who could talk about it. I think that would be very helpful.
Ms. Aiken?
Orlando has adopted an EV ordinance. I believe it's called the Electric Vehicle Readiness Ordinance. St. Pete is considering it, but has not yet adopted, and Largo is involved in a process to test the implementation in 3 activity centers. They are going to be reporting back to their council, I believe, in November or December. So locally, that's what's, semi-locally, that's what's happening. I can provide you with the Orlando ordinance if you are interested in seeing it. A lot of the emphasis is on EV capable during construction, not necessarily an EV requirement currently. Depends upon the type of use. So that's what I can tell you right now, and it's up to you what you would like for us to do.
I mean, there's no question that technology is changing, and I think the adoption is increasing, and hopefully the prices will continue to come down for people so that it's affordable for everybody. I know it isn't for a lot of folks today. We were a little bit ahead of our time back in the downtown. We gave incentives, and Gina, you might remember the specifics on it. I know the Walgreens at Myrtle and Cleveland had chargers, which was one of the first around back then, and I think it was in the downtown plan that we gave incentives. Do you recall that? Fortunately, back then, I don't think they got used much, but
Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. I do not. It's not been a requirement of the downtown plan. Right now, we offer parking reductions in US 19 for the use of EV charging stations, and some folks have availed themselves to that. And I think we do it in the downtown as well. One note about the city of St. Petersburg, they have adopted a requirement for parking garages, but not across the board. And so for residential projects, they have to have EV ready, a certain percentage for one type, a certain percentage for another one, but not, just across the board.
I think this is a discussion item for the future. I think that's what we need to do. We need to get more educated. I know that there are some buildings, I have clients at Ovation down in St. Pete. They did not put enough capacity in, and it's extraordinarily expensive to come back and add capacity to that building. So some of the people that moved in and had EVs, they've got the chargers, there's other people that want them, and they're looking at an assessment in that building just to get them. So I think it behooves us to get ahead of the curve, but I also believe that the market has to determine some of that too. Going back to what the vice mayor said, if there's a new developer, they need to determine what's going to be the demand from their customers. Ms. Boyd, do you have something you can add?
Good morning, Sheridan Boyle, Sustainability Coordinator.
Boyle, I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind.
Oh, you're fine. So very much what the vice mayor said, it is a chicken or the egg scenario, but I will say with looking back to our greenhouse gas inventory, we see that transportation is increasing slightly and is one of the hardest to tackle. So I wouldn't want to discourage any person from purchasing an electric vehicle. I will also say we do see by a large majority of the charging happens at home. Currently, there is not really a reason that an apartment complex would go out of their way to put in the charging stations themselves. So I wouldn't want to, I understand that they should meet the market demands, but as we're trying to encourage people to adopt electric vehicles, it might be helpful for the city to have part in that conversation.
I'd like to make it a carrot though, and not a stick.
Okay.
So that's the way I'd like to go about that, with incentives rather than penalties. Councilmember Beckman?
So Sheridan, I should know this, I should have looked it up last night, but do you know what is our green print goal related to EV charging stations? Do we have a number per year?
We don't have a number. Part of that difficulty is gauging, what the battery capacity will hold and needing to understand where the leverage points are across the city. Greenprint does recommend the city look into an EV-ready ordinance for specifically multifamily units.
which is where equity comes in. So if people are lower income and don't have a home to plug in their car, we need to require these multifamily housing units to have EV charging so that they're able to have a lower cost, lower maintenance EV, of which these major automobile manufacturers are only going to be manufacturing. And so I think it's critical to do it now, to have a presentation now. We've all had a presentation with Dory Larson with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy with EV readiness, and she could come and speak. But I don't want to put it off. I mean, I think we've got some real positive goals in green print, and it's not just going to be put on a shelf. As we're building and constructing, we need to have EV ready in these new constructions. We interviewed the city attorney candidates, and I met the manager of the Opal Sands, and he was talking about the hotel that's going to be built across the street. And the first thing I asked him, well, how many EVs, ready stations are you going to have in there? And just told him that, you need to have a lot. Coming out of the Florida League of Cities, where we stayed at this huge Marriott Orlando, and they had 2 EVs chargers, and one wasn't working, and it's tough. And I do drive my car outside of Clearwater. And, you can certainly plot your way around, but as Sheridan said, it's the chicken or the egg. And we need to be leaders. If Orlando's done something and St. Pete is looking at it and Largo's looking at it, why wait? I just, I'm going to continue to push for being real proactive, especially with equity for these types of infrastructures. And,
One point of clarification, as the city attorney mentioned, the EV readiness is also just EV capable. There's a little bit of a distinction, and some of that is just making sure the connection is there available rather than the infrastructure. And as the mayor mentioned, we do see, without having that capableness beforehand, it increases the price 3 times of that installation.
Well, I think we need to have further discussions. I will tell you, we're having them in the Imagine Clearwater and Coachman Park. There are certain policy decisions I think that need to be made. I don't, frankly, support us continuing to have the Garden Street garages free. I know people use it, but I don't think the rest of the citizens ought to be paying for somebody else's EV. I'm sorry. I don't ask for anyone to pay my gas bill. I don't think we ought to have free charging in the garage. I think people ought to carry their own weight, and that's a policy decision. Mr. Maxwell?
So what I'm hearing is that you would like us to come back for a discussion item with some best practices for helping the city become EV ready, whether it's requiring by, at time of permit or in the permitting process, something, some amount of EV, or some incentive, a carrot to push developers to come forward with something. We'll bring forward a number of options in the coming months, so we can discuss that a little further.
Well, I mean, we have pretty stringent parking requirements, and now if you put X number of EV chargers, and those are then reserved for EV cars, and are they going to be reserved for only when they're charging? Now we can be increasing, especially with structured parking, we could be increasing X number of parking spaces. So are we going to relax the parking requirement?
There are many things that we need to look at for that best practice discussion that relate to implementation. I will say that as it relates to something like Orlando, we have some challenges that Orlando does not as it relates to the flood zone and our ability to place EVs at I guess an efficient number, amount, cost on the beach is what we're finding. So we need to tackle that as part of this conversation as well, make sure that we're, whatever it is, makes sense financially on the beach, on the mainland.
Which goes to my point, I want to take this while moving forward, I want to make sure we take it slow enough that we are trying to anticipate the unintended consequences. Because that's one of the mistakes that's made when you move too fast, is I think you come back and re-examine and say, well, in retrospect, I wish I'd done X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, because, and Kathleen, if you can educate, because this is where I really don't know. What is the average time it takes to charge an electric vehicle? Or I've heard it takes 8 hours, and I've heard there's some that you can charge in about 30 to 40 minutes. Is it just based on the vehicle and everything else? Because, again, like, as the mayor said, if we put them in downtown, if it's a car that can be charged in 40 minutes, do we want them sitting in that spot for 3 hours? Or, is there a time limit on that spot? They have to come back and move it to a regular parking space? And, how do we do that? Because, I'll be honest with you, General Motors just came out with an electric version of the vehicle I drive, and it's absolutely spectacular. Now, my son says he's going to hate me if I buy it because I'm trying to put him out of a job because of the company he works for in Houston, Texas. But that's a whole nother discussion. But
Yeah, that's inside baseball.
huh? Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, there's so many, like, that's why I say this is such a moving target that it requires a lot of discussion, and I think it's not premature to have those discussions, for sure.
No, it's not. And it does vary on if you have a fast charger, what type of car you have. And just to make one little correction, I don't think there was ever a car that was built with just 60 miles of electric miles and no hybrid. The Leaf we bought at first had a maximum range of 114, which was low. I'd go down to St. Pete and back, and if you have the air conditioning on and blah, blah, blah. But, so there is a variability there, and I'm not, I don't know that off the top of my head. I can get a printout, I'm sure. But the other thing that you bring up of EVs parking in EV charging stations, and by the way, I'm fully on board of paying for that parking at the Garden Street garage, or paying for the charge. That's reasonable. But the big thing is when people park their cars and they leave and they're there for more than 4 hours. I wrote a nasty note for the first time in my life at the Marriott there in Orlando because somebody was parked there for 24 hours. You just can't do that. So that's another enforcement thing. I don't know if the police would go around and give a ticket but they're developing apps that will inform you of when your car is fully charged. I'm sure you can put limits on a charge that once your car is at 50%, maybe it'll turn off. In Japan, they have a van that goes around and will charge your car for you while it sits out on the street. And so, so that's pretty interesting. You just pull up an app and it's like, come on down Washington Street and you plug into my charge and you do this super fast charge. So it is moving and changing, but just because it's moving fast doesn't mean we don't jump on the train and start going forward. So I'm okay with having some experts in here doing some research about what other municipalities are doing and how people are handling cars that camp out at an EV charger, because there's nothing more frustrating, than that. So thank you for considering it, and maybe we can, in the next couple of months have somebody present or something.
Anything to be put on future agendas?
Oh, I do. Big surprise. Okay, so for the future, okay. I'd like to talk a little bit, so again, I'll probably, just a forewarn, probably be bringing up some aspect of green print in multiple work sessions as we go forward. So one thing I'd like to talk about is what are we doing to educate and help residents and businesses understand we've got green print, these are our goals, please join us. And a key component of that is equity, which means you have to be real intentional in who you're reaching out to. The other thing having to do with the budget approval coming up in September is where's the money that we're going to put in to the budget to start meeting green print goals. So what kind of an account is it going into, who's going to manage it, how are we going to fund all the initiatives that Sheridan has articulated, because I don't want to wait another year to start doing some of those things. So I'd like to have that, who's going to keep track of the savings, how are we going to reinvest those savings? So I think those are the two things.
Well, I would recommend that you talk to Mr. Maxwell in one-on-ones first, and then if that's something that needs to be discussed amongst the council, then we can agenda it.
We do have, so council knows, we have an implementation transfer that's going in the next budget amendment. So that next meeting that we have, that will be an opportunity to discuss some of the funds. There is some amount that is in the actual budget, which Ms. Castle can speak to at the next meeting as well during the budget presentation.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last thing is, and I'm learning, that I'm new up here and I'm learning. So when I asked a few meetings back about some allocation of general funds for more social services in our economic and development and housing department perhaps, and you had asked, well, do you want this as an ongoing allocation or a pilot? And I said, well, ongoing. And so I'm learning I probably should have said pilot, which is fine. And so I'm asking if we can, look at that again and maybe talk with Ms. Sanderson and Mr. Lang about what a pilot might look like and if we could allocate more funds. So again, I shared with you that draft of an overview of the situation from Amy Foster, who heads up the continuum of care, and it's really troubling information and data points, and I think we need to do a little more. So I wanted to know if we could talk about a possible pilot program, if we could address that maybe one more time.
We can put it on the agenda.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we're adjourned. We'll see everybody Thursday.